The clerk told me that we've already formed a quorum and it's also time for us to start. So let's start this meeting of the Public Works Subcommittee. Thank you for attending. Today we'll continue to scrutinize the outstanding item left over from our meeting on the 3rd of January. This is to recommend to the Finance Committee to increase the approved project estimate of $36.039 billion, an increase from $28.1046 billion by $7.9343 billion. In money of the day prices. Here I'd like to remind members something about pecuniary interests. If you are directly or indirectly related to any issue pecuniarily, then in accordance with 83A of the Rules of Procedure, you have to make a declaration of the interest before speaking. And then under ROP 84, there are provisions in relation to voting when any member has a direct pecuniary interest in the item. We have the standing officials today from the Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau, the Development Bureau, and the Home Affairs Bureau, or the Housing Bureau and Highways Department. This item is on Central Wan Chai Bypass and Island Eastern Corridor Link. It's paper PWSC 2013-14-29 in relation to project 579TH. In attendance to answer members' questions today, we have Mr. Yao Xingmu, Undersecretary for Transport and Housing, Ms. Judy Chung, Principal Assistant Secretary for Transport and Housing for Transport, Mr. Lau Ka-kyung, Director of Highways, Mr. Jimmy Chan, Project Manager for Major Works from the Highways Department, and Mr. Lawrence Ho, Chief Engineer for Major Works from the Highways Department. This paper recommends that the approved project estimate for 579TH by $7.9343 billion from $28.1046 billion to $36.0389 billion in money of the day prices because of the increased construction cost. On the 15th of November last year, the transport panel was consulted. Panel members supported the proposal. And in accordance with members' request, the administration has already provided a supplementary paper, and the salient points have already been submitted to this meeting. I believe PWSC members are familiar with this item because this item was actually left over from the last two meetings. Before members ask questions, I wonder whether departmental representatives would like to do a briefing. If not, I'll invite members to ask questions. Oh, Undersecretary. Mr. Chairman, as the paper is already set out in detail, our explanation on our funding application, particularly in paragraph 16 and paras 9 to 12. 80% was actually for preparation for the increased costs. And then in paragraph 16, we elaborate on our applications. This is something to do with the prevailing circumstances back then. And Hong Kong's economy rapidly picked up, causing a discrepancy between the present situation and the prevailing circumstances then. I believe members are clear about the contents of the paper, so I won't explain in detail. I'll see what questions members may have. Members, if you want to speak, please indicate to me. Mr. Wong Kok Heng, I believe today, for the time being, we don't have that many members attending, so I'll give each member 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the start of this project, I was a councillor in New Territories West. Back then, I also supported the project. Now I'm an elected councillor of Hong Kong Island. If we do not continue with the project to Hong Kong Island North, the traffic congestion problem would continue, and we don't see any solution. Hong Kong Island residents are very concerned about this project because Central Wan Chai Bypass is the traffic artery of Hong Kong Island. So I would like to have the project completed as soon as possible so as to solve the traffic congestion on Hong Kong Island North. But they are overspending, and this time they're asking us for $7.9 billion more. Over half of the projects on Hong Kong Island overspent. I believe the administration should absorb lessons from this repeated wrong estimation on the costs of projects. Is it that the estimation mechanism is problematic? Should you not do something to prevent a recurrence? And then we have an archaeological study under this project. I'd like to know the latest progress. That is on Callot Island. Now we've already started this project. It's just like shaving your head. If you are now midway, you cannot stop midway. So if we do not approve this proposal, I don't know for how long this project will be delayed. And I'm not sure whether the archaeological study on Callot Island would be delayed as well or affected. Under Secretary, any problem with your estimation mechanism? Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful to Mr. Wong for pointing out that this is a strategic project, particularly for Hong Kong Island North. So we'll try to speed up as soon as possible such that it can be completed by 2017. As for the estimation mechanism, we understand members' concerns. The Highways Department checked its record in the past decade. In terms of project estimation, there are 72 projects involving $320 billion. Only 10 projects had to got additional funding to the tune of $20 billion, an increase of 6%. Well, given such a huge system of projects, we believe our existing mechanism is appropriate. Overspending does not occur to every project. As for road construction, in our opinion, the mechanism is all right. As for other projects, it is not convenient for us to comment on other projects, including projects not related to roads. They have another mechanism. Given our past experience, the mechanism is an effective reference. Now, this project is special. In 2009, when we came for funding in the middle of the year, we made reference to the situation in March. We referred to the indicators then. In March that year, Hong Kong's economy was at a trough. So we did not know, under the influence of the international financial turmoil, our estimations were made at a low time for our economy. But because of a number of factors, our economy picked up. That's why we had this discrepancy. As for the adjustments, I'll defer. That is the Khaled Island issue. I'll defer to the director. Mr. Wong asked about Khaled Island just outside the Cross Harbour Tunnel. We're very serious in preserving archaeological sites. Now, this project will not affect Khaled Island because it is to go underneath the Cross Harbour Tunnel. Mr. Ibrahim, 5 minutes. Mr. Chairman, Central Wan Chai bypass is indeed very important to the whole of Hong Kong Island. Without it, will suffer huge economic loss. It will be serious. Well, this Central Wan Chai bypass has been delayed very seriously. Because of environmental issues. We had a number of options. It should have proceeded, but then a number of factors emerged later. So it is impossible not to support this project. As a Central and Western District Councillor, I've witnessed the whole process related to Central Wan Chai bypass. We've been discussing this for 20 years. I'm really very saddened. This project cannot be delayed any further. As for the increased costs, as the Undersecretary pointed out, there are details in the paper, particularly in paragraphs 9 to 12. There are a lot of details in terms of illustration and explanation.
I asked myself why there is such a great discrepancy in the project estimates. Well, much has been said about this. Well, there are so many projects going on in Hong Kong, tunnel projects, road projects, which have driven up costs in labor and materials and so on. So that's been a substantial increase. Well, but then this project is not related in a way. In paragraph 11, can you explain in greater detail how the estimates were done? Well, you said that from 2018 to 2023, there will be a 5% increase per annum. Now, the project is going to be commissioned in 2017. How come you come up with a figure for that period, i.e. after 2017? Can you elaborate on that and explain more? Well, we did conduct a briefing on the project estimates. There were many questions raised during that meeting. So can the Undersecretary elaborate on this point? Chairman, as we all know, this is a road network project, and it is a public works project. And we adopt the mechanism used by public works departments. When we make projections, we have to use information which is available at that particular time. And we have to make projections for, say, the future. And we have to include factors like inflation and deflation. So we use this price adjustment factor. So this is a mechanism in line with that of other government departments. And the economists used these 4 macroeconomic factors for coming up with a figure, and that is yearly and quarterly public sector building and construction output, and then the costs of materials and labor and the trends. And third, the world economic trends, and then fourth, the Hong Kong's future economic trends. So these are the 4 factors taken on board in coming up with the price adjustment factor. And the factor is adjusted on a half-yearly basis. And we will tell the PWSC the updated figures every half year. So this is a formula that we are using. Now, as for the basis of this formula, perhaps the Development Bureau colleagues can supplement. Mr. Chen Chi-ming, Deputy Secretary for Development. As we said in the last meeting, we have explained the entire project estimate mechanism. I'm not going to repeat that. So when in the project estimation, we would have 2 factors. One is the prevailing information, and then we will make projections for the future. We think this is a good mechanism, and this is a transparent mechanism through which the electrical can monitor us. If we lump the 2 sets of figures together, that would not be good, because you will not be able to see the actual figures and the projected figures. Now, we made the estimate in 2009. This is a mega-scale project, which is complicated. So the price adjustment considerations taken on board that time are not valid today, so hence the discrepancy. What about 2018 to 2023? Why do we have to make provisions for that period? Because at the end of the paragraph 11, you said that you have made a provision for that period, 2018 to 2023. I don't get it. Well, I'll try to explain and then see if the THB has anything to say or add. Well, the price adjustment should not stop at 2017. We are looking at the money of day prices. So some of the payments have to be effected after 2017 or in 2018 and so on. So we are trying to point out the trends here. Next, Ms. Emily Lau, Chairman. So, Chairman, I don't come from your sector, but then some people in the sector have complained that payments are not effective after completion of works. So I think you should effect payment as soon as possible. This is a complaint that I've heard for many years already. Now, you're coming to ask us for $8 billion. And people were asking us whether we are ATM machines. Now, last week, we rejected the application for the building of the RTHK headquarters. And the staff were very disappointed. And actually, there was a suspension of water supply at RTHK. And then the staff were complaining whether the government is trying to deprive the RTHK staff of all their rights. People in Hong Kong don't understand why the government is suddenly coming up with an additional funding request for $8 billion. Now, in the afternoon, we are also asking for an additional funding of $8.5 billion for Lian Tang, BCP. So, administration, can you come up with a better mechanism to inform electrical and the public to update us regularly on the progress and the overspending situation? Now, residents are hoping that the road network can be completed as soon as possible. Now, we rejected the funding application for our THK, and that sent shocks across the entire community. So in that kind of circumstances, how can we function as LegCo? We do have enough votes to vote against your proposal, but that is going to be a big problem. It's going to affect adversely the concerned parties. But then you have to let us monitor you properly. So within the whole mechanism, can you do something or do some improvement? Well, people are complaining that you are not doing a good gatekeeping role. Now, I also read from the paper in paragraph 13D, there are some projects which are seeing a reduction in the costs. Here it says it's $84.7 million. So during the whole design process, can you inform us earlier that there is overspending? Of course, we can still vote against your overspending. But then if you inform us earlier, then it will be better. Because now we are given no choice to vote against you because we are informed at this late stage. Well, I agree with Ms. Lau that we are here today precisely to let you know the latest progress of the works and we give you sufficient reasons on why there is additional funding needed. Because we envisage that there will be drastic increases in provision for price adjustment. So say from 2013 to 2017, we anticipate that there would be an increase of 6% in the costs, and then from 2018 to 2023, 5%. Because of all these factors, so we need the additional funding. Say if the economy turns for the worse in the future, we don't need to spend up all the money. If that is the case, the money will still be resting with the Treasury. So we're trying to get the ceiling of the additional funding. And we stringently control costs. So if reductions in costs are possible, we will have the reductions. And we will also be drawing down from the contingency provisions to fund these some of the additional works. So we are laying out the figures very clearly here so that members can scrutinize to see whether the funding request is well justified. Chairman, my questions are direct. Can the administration update us in phases and earlier? Now that the contingency is being drawn down and you're still asking for $8 billion, so this is a very serious problem. Why hasn't he answered my question? My questions are direct. Perhaps I'll defer to the Director of Highways to explain why not all the contingency provisions can be used up. Thank you, Ms. Lau, for your questions. We will try to cut down the costs as much as possible, and we launch many measures like in the design. The design will be will not be very costly, and we ask the contractors to come up with competitive bids. So these are the things that we can do. In paragraph 13D, there are some items and which the tender prices are lower than envisaged. And this is because the contractors can do that because of their experience and they're using a less costly type of equipment and so on. So there is room for reduction in costs because of advances in technology, and equipment may get cheaper. So there is room for reduction in costs for certain facilities and equipment. So we would include that in our future contracts. So you've run over your allotted time. So I would like to add that for public works projects, we do submit regular reports to the electrical, laying down the comparison between the project estimates and the tendered prices. If there are discrepancies over 10% or $15 million, we would give the reasons in the report. So all the tenderers information is provided to electrical immediately. And we also have quarterly reports which set out the progress of works. All this information is submitted to electrical. In the first round, 5 other members wish to speak. So 5 minutes each for each member. So please be succinct. Ms. Emily Lau, would you be speaking for the second round? All right, Mr. Yik Chi Ming. So originally the central wire top bypass should have been commissioned shortly after 1997, and we don't want to see any more delay because the social cost is huge. So the paper has to do a lot with the increase in provision for price adjustment. In the past several years, there has been a shortage of workers in Hong Kong, and wages have risen. And then the Hong Kong dollar has depreciated against other currencies because it's pegged to US dollars. So we can understand the costs are rising. So in Appendix 2 or Enclosure 2, you list out all the contracts, and you list the contract award date and the status. Can you give us more information? What is the target completion date? What is the percentage of works completed? Can you give us more information? And you said in the paper that the project will be commissioned in 2017. Is it a conservative or optimistic plan? So there are so many infrastructure works going on. Do we have sufficient workers to undertake all these works? Will there be any more delay? And will the wages continue to soar because of the shortage of workers?
Who will answer? Undersecretary? I'll defer to the Director. All right, Director of Highways. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his questions. The whole project covers 13 contracts. The paper says that 12 contracts had already been granted and completed. We only have 1 outstanding contract to be awarded. The 40% of the structures of the tunnel had been completed. For the typhoon shelter and the provisional structures, they've been 35% completed. So progress has been good. Therefore, the completion date of 2017 is a reasonable estimation. If this funding proposal is approved today, we'll grant the final contract. Then all contracts will proceed as scheduled with the target date of completion being 2017. Well, that's a piece of good news. They'll be able to complete the project by 2017. Well, you are asking for a few $billion more. Will you have enough? Will you come back for further funding? Well, this extra funding will be sufficient for the future. All right, no increase required in future. Dr. Chang Lai-wan. Mr. Chairman, I read their paper. In the whole paper, they're saying that they would like to have an increase of 20-odd%. They're asking for about $8 billion. Enclosure 4 of the paper sets out the details of this $8 billion. We'll just go down the list from A downwards. Apart from F, item F, that is an increase from $636.9 million to $947 million, a rise of 56%. The remaining increases are apparently not huge. There were increases, but within acceptable ranges. Now, why do they need another $8 billion? It's because of the provision for price adjustments, almost $7 billion. Now, this $7 billion for price adjustment, what is it actually? Why do we need to pay $7 billion more? All right, I see a great deal of explanation here. However, sometimes I really don't know what you are saying, okay? Of course, you are sometimes saying that, oh, it's like this. Prices have become higher. As the Undersecretary said, construction costs have risen. But in what way? For what items? What sort of increases are you talking about, and how much money, extra money, do we need? There are no answers in the paper, and you have not been able to provide justifications in the paper to convince us for approving this extra funding. Well, this is a rather wishy-washy paper, so to speak. Of course, this project is under the Transport Department, but the Development Bureau is also involved. I think we should seriously look into this proposal. I think you are the spendthrift amongst the spendthrifts. Every project is overspending by billions of dollars. You're not talking about millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. You are always coming for billions of dollars extra. You should review the whole process to ensure that in future you'll be able to control prices better. In particular, for the Secretary for Development, Mr. Paul Chan, he's also a surveyor. Can he accept this sort of continuous rises in costs? Can he accept such extra funding proposals? I don't think so, because he has also been a LegCo member. So you should consider new measures to effect better monitoring. You should not be spending taxpayers' money in this manner. And the LegCo should not be treated like an automatic teller machine. All right, let me ask you something about item G in enclosure 4. Why such a huge increase? I defer to the Director of Highways for F and O, items F and O. I've said something about O, but the Director will say something about item F first. Well, for item F, paragraph 13C of the paper has offered an explanation. It was basically for the final ventilation facilities or structures in the tunnel. In the planning stage, we already conducted EIAs. The ventilation system is up to standard, but during consultation, we heard residents' views to the effect that they would like to see further improvement in the exhaust systems, that is, the air purification system, the APS. This is to enhance the air quality further. So, because of this APS, for better quality of exhaust air from tunnels, will effect a rise in cost to the tune of $7 billion. So that's actually to entertain residents' requests. Next, Mr. Chan Kam Lam. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For this project, a colleague said that we had already started. Yes, that's reality. But in the control of prices, the government needs to do something. The biggest increase is related to the provision for price adjustments. I think the Undersecretary should make it clear how much money will actually be needed. Now they've got assumptions up to 2023. By doing so, will they be asking for much more? I'd like to have an explanation from the administration. Just now, Mr. Frankie Yik asked a question. We're still more than 3 years from the target completion date of 2017. Now, will this extra funding be sufficient? The Undersecretary provided an affirmative answer. So, can you cap the cost at that level? If you can make that undertaking, we'll feel more comfortable. Secondly, you cannot mix this extra funding proposal with the RTHK application, because the rise of construction costs is already a reality here for this project. But for the RTHK project is under severe criticisms. It's really a spendthrift project. There's a huge discrepancy in the area, floor area of the building. That's really a waste. That was the biggest image project, so to speak, for the 21st century for the government. Mr. Chairman, when we use public money, we have to be pragmatic in our spending. We should not carry out cosmetic projects which look good but do not have actual uses. So we should not overspend for such a building in the RTHK project. Even if the government is to go to the Finance Committee, I strongly oppose it. So don't mix the two. For the RTHK project, there are all possibilities for adjusting the funding proposals. So, Mr. Chairman, let me ask again, can they cap the spending at this level? Undersecretary, can you cap the cost? There are two parts here in the question. For the financial implication, why up to 2023? Actually, in paragraph 17, we set out the cash payments. 2015, 2016, and 2017 will see the biggest spending. And thereafter, spending will drop. So, we are telling members the trend up to 2023. As regards capping the cost, the basis of this paper is September 2013. The government economist has estimated the production trend in the construction of buildings, as well as cash flow and risks. If the external economic environment is not to change drastically, we believe that this extra funding will be able to cope with the ensuing costs. Mr. Chan? Well, even in paragraph 17, we see that the total adjustment will only be $36.0389 billion only. So you're actually making preparation only. Now, these are not the prices, not the actual payments for the contractors. Well, yes, this is an estimate. And every 6 years, in accordance with the latest data provided by the government economists, will make adjustments. In future, if inflation slows down, the actual payments in future may not be the figures listed here. So in future, we'll report to members further. Well, members asked about the provision for price adjustments. That is in paragraphs 9 to 12. In 2009, there was an adjustment for price fluctuations. Well, the estimates then were rather conservative, and that's understandable. Why is it that from 2009 to 2013, you're only making such adjustments now? Why didn't you spot the discrepancies in 2010 and came to LegCo to elaborate and ask for extra funding? Can you further explain? Mr. Chairman, of course, in 2009, we're still not certain about the future trends. In 2010, we did make adjustments. The adjustment was from 2% to 2.9% then. And the economy further picked up, and the adjustment was made up to 5.9%. But the spending principle is that within our control, we'll try as far as possible to use our own money. But when we come to a stage that according to our estimation, we won't be able to make payments in future, we'll have to come to LegCo for extra funding. And here we've set out all relevant factors and changes to explain to members. When our departments planned for the project, they already made such estimations. But if we are to come to LegCo for funding, we really have to examine our accounts thoroughly. We must make sure that our funding proposals are appropriate before we come back here.
On Mr. Chen Kam Lam's concern, well, I don't think there will be drastic changes in the future because most of the contracts have already been awarded. So the changes in the future may not be that drastic. There is only one contract which is still outstanding. That is HY 201108. Next one, Mr. Michael Tin. Thank you, Chairman. An increase of $7 billion. I think it has to do with wages and material costs. And I understand that Hong Kong was an economic trough in 2008 and 9, and then construction material costs have soared. Thereafter, it may have even doubled. I can understand the doubling of the costs, and this has to do with external factors. But then I don't see that average wage in Hong Kong has doubled. So implies that maybe perhaps the wages in the construction industry have risen. So I would like to know that within this 7 billion amount, what is the share of wages? So I retrieved records from the Highways Department. I think 30% has to do with wages. And then, all right, maybe $2 billion has to do with rising wages. And I know that wages in the construction industry may be higher than the average. But then the government stays firm in the stance on not importing workers for the industry. So the administration, have you made an assessment of this $2 billion? It say if you knew about the situation earlier and you have already imported construction workers from overseas, how much could we have saved, or how much can we save within this $2 billion amount? Now, because you refuse to import construction workers from overseas, how much extra do tax workers have to pay as a result? I support giving priority to local workers, but then we're facing a very competitive situation here. Everyone is seeking construction workers. So have you made an assessment of the situation on the rising wages of construction workers? Well, we don't have this figure about $2 billion. In the provision for price adjustment, and that is based really on the prices of public sector building and construction output, and there is no delineation of the factor of wages here within the sum. Well, it's impossible that you don't have that kind of assessment. In the last meeting, I already raised this point. From Highways Department's information, 30% has to do with wages. So in this amount, $7 billion, $2 billion has to do with wages. So my question is, if you are going to import overseas workers, how much can we save? So, Chairman, I just explained that we didn't make particular calculations on the wages within the provision for price adjustment according to Highways Department's information. Wages take up around 30% of the entire construction costs. That's a correct figure. So, well, then that amounts to $2 billion then. Now, if you import workers, will we be able to reduce the amount? Have you made that assessment? Well, it's all right. We're just saying, tell me yes or no whether you have done that assessment. We don't do that kind of presumption or assumption. Now, you say that the project will be completed in 2017, but you can't be sure that you can get enough workers, and you don't plan to import workers. I don't understand how come that you can undertake to complete the works in 2017. Under Secretary, we come up with this calculation based on the external economic factors and the progress of contract works. Well, Under Secretary, how can you ensure that you can get enough workers? I'll defer to the Highways Department to tackle that question. Well, are you so smart that you know that you can certainly get enough workers next year? As for workers, contractors are bringing overseas workers from the supplementary labor scheme. So if needed, they can make the application. Well, for now, the contractors have not resorted to that scheme yet. We told contractors that they should resort to various measures to carry out the works, like using more machines instead of workers in carrying out the works. So actually, contractors are using more machines in order to avoid importing workers and to also address the problem of worker shortage. If needed, contractors can readily import workers under the labor supplementary scheme. Of course, we don't know about the situation for the next year, but for now, if needed, the contractors can import workers under that scheme I mentioned. Also, we talked with the Labor Department, and for many projects, it may be possible that we need to import workers from overseas, and Labor Department is asked to help import workers if needed. Dr. Fernando Zhang next. PWSC is continuously discussing or focusing on overspending here. Even for the building of a school, there is overspending. And then we are also going to discuss about Liantang overspending again. And the government comes back repeatedly to provide justifications, even though they are making what they call good estimates. There are still overspending situations. So can the government seriously look into the project estimate mechanism, including estimates, management of project, and project planning? Is there any room for review? Apparently, the construction costs, including material costs and wages, well, the rises may have to do with external factors, but some rises are not related to external factors. We are investing large sums of money into construction projects these years, which have driven up wages and material costs, and that may not have anything to do with external economic factors. So these are all internal factors. Can you do a review on the planning? Since we know that we'll have so many infrastructure projects, can we do more on manpower planning? We don't necessarily have to import workers. We should make the best use of local resources, and we should help local workers. But then, if we don't have planning of manpower, and then we invest large sums of money into projects, and we're driving up labor costs, so whose mistake is it? Now, as for project estimates, different countries have different mechanisms. I am not from the sector. I'm not very familiar with this work area, but I do know that the United States has a very clear and transparent mechanism and a set of clear guidelines. Say the National Defense Department have a unified criteria guidelines covering design and cost estimates and contract arrangements. They do have a set of clear guidelines. What about Hong Kong? Should the SARG consider coming up with a unified or standardized guidelines so that we can avoid the situation where different government departments have discrepancies in coming up with project estimates? I don't want to repeatedly discuss these issues at the PWSC. I'll talk about 3 points. The project volume, we project that the project volume will stay stable within the next few years, around $70 billion for government projects. So we are having a stringent control on projects. As for training of local workers, in the past few years, in the next few years, we are working together with the Construction Industry Council in order to attract young talents to receive training. And we launch initiatives like work on-the-job training. And we've applied for $320 million from the electrical to enhance training in the construction industry. Now, as for the labor supplementary scheme, for certain trades in the construction industry, if we identify there is a shortage, we can make use of that scheme, which can immediately provide the needed workers. And also, some workers may also be released to help with the training work. And actually, at the construction sites, we need a small amount of workers to do training work. As for the cost estimate mechanism, we do have a mechanism using risk analysis. And we continuously conduct studies on our mechanism, making comparisons with that of overseas jurisdictions. Actually, last year, we asked a university professor to make comparisons between Hong Kong's mechanism with that of some 30 other jurisdictions. And we're very happy that the professor gave very positive comments on our own mechanism. And in overseas jurisdictions, there is an average overspending of 20%. But for Hong Kong, over the years, we are having a lower spending than our estimates, as much as negative 1%. Now, for the past several years, we made funding for application for 600 projects, and there was only 34 projects which run into overspending, taking up 3.4%. And actually, there are many more projects which have not spent up to the project estimate. So the actual payment is negative 1% than the project estimates.
Will you submit that report you mentioned to the PWSC for reference? Well, that's an internal study. After they've completed their tasks, we'll collate the data. When will that be completed? Within this year, a few months from now. All right. So by then, would you please furnish us with those information that can be made available to us? Well, obviously, in the past 10 years, they might have performed very well, but in recent times, we've got a lot of overspending projects. Well, that's worthy of our concern. Dr. Kenneth Chan, just now the answer was very interesting. It depends on the duration of collecting statistics. When the market was relaxed, you might be calculating the average figures for a period of 20 to 30 years, and then you say you feel very happy because the actual spending was lower than estimated. But in recent times, we've been vetting overspending projects. Later today, we'll have a development panel meeting to discuss the Liantang Hengyun Y project. Well, let's not talk about the private market and its construction projects. Let's just look at government projects. There's overspending, wages, construction materials, or even machinery. You overspent on all these items, and then the government had to come back for extra funding. more and more government projects have been overspending, and you have to compete with other projects in terms of wages, construction materials, and so forth. I think the LegCo is not just asking for statistics or internal documents. In terms of overall planning, you must do your estimation well, because when we have a peak in construction projects, you suffer from such huge discrepancies, and you have no way out but to come back to LegCo for extra funding. It's because of this bunching effect for government projects. So our colleagues may not just be asking for papers from the government. We're asking for fundamental commitments. Well, if you fail in your estimation, just admit it. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to focus my questions on construction. In paragraph 8 of the paper, they say that they did a tunnel survey, and then they had difficulties in sampling. And then they had difficulties with roads, navigation channels, piers, and so forth. And the bedrock depth was deeper than expected, and eventually the bedrock levels were deeper than expected, so they had to use deeper diaphragm walls and barrette piles. So on the one hand, we have rising construction costs. On the other, they have to make extra provision for price adjustments. Well, I'm a layman, but the professionals told me that all along, they had to collect samples. All along, they had been encountering such difficulties. So for sampling internally, what range of deviations do you allow? Now here, there are definite discrepancies between estimation and reality. Who should be held liable? Director? Mr. Chairman, as pointed out by Dr. Chan, in the planning stage, we did carry out investigation works. And normally, we drilled holes to assess the depth of the bedrock for the production of piles, diaphragm walls, etc. We had to calculate the numbers required. So for this project, the approach adopted was no different from the normal approach for such projects. But as mentioned here, we would like to do more because the overall project cost is huge. So we don't want to have huge discrepancies. But in actual fact, we discovered actual difficulties. Well, normally, we'll only take sufficient numbers of samples to assess the depth of the bedrock. But if you want to do better, you need to do more. In fact, we drilled 280 investigation holes. Given the length of this tunnel, it's already a very dense figure. Still, we would like to do more, but at certain locations, it's really impossible. As mentioned in paragraph 8, certain investigation holes are on top of typhoon shelters and navigation channels, so we're unable to take more samples. Anyway, what we had done was sufficient to allow us to proceed with design, and eventually the consultant proceeded with the design. Statistically, deviations are allowed for sampling results. In particular, for the geology of Hong Kong, the bedrock is very often difficult. Very often, we have very deep bedrock strata. So it is very difficult to take a sample where the bedrock is hard. In particular, for a bridge, at the point of the pillar we can drill an investigation bore. But for these diaphragm walls, we're talking about hundreds of meters of continuous walls. So you have to look at the continuous changes along such a deep bedrock. So drilling had been difficult. So we tried our very best to do appropriate estimation, but we did have difficulties. Well, but the tunnel has to go through those locations. You mentioned actual difficulties, and you did not take samples at certain positions. Well, that's of course an error. You should have taken samples at those locations, but you did not do so. And now you're coming back for extra funding precisely because of that problem. So you really need to go back and carry out a review. So in future, should you also take samples at such locations? Or in future, when you come for funding, you should inform us that there is a lack of information because of certain factors. I think that is a better way to go about it. The same happens to the tunnel in Liantang Hengyun Wai. There were no samples for certain locations, and back then we said, oh, let it be, we just approve your funding proposal. Well, you're an engineer, you always ask why not. So I'm asking you why not? Why didn't you take samples at those positions? Well, a brief answer, please. Mr. Chairman, when we had to decide whether or not we should take more samples or just proceed with design, we have to strike a balance. Now, we have to calculate the cost. If the cost is too high, then we have to do investigation again. But if the cost is not too high, then we will take into consideration the possible variations or deviations. Now, here we're talking about $900 million, contract cost $600 million. But for these diaphragm walls and barrette piles, we had to spend $300 million. Now, the overall cost is estimated to be $5.6 billion. So the deviation was only 5 to 6%. Given this level of deviation, we had to decide whether or not we should continue to drill holes along these hundreds of meters of bedrock. Mr. Tam Yu-chung. Mr. Chairman, every time when I look down from this building and the Western Harbour crossing, I would like the Central Wan Chai bypass to be completed as soon as possible. Apparently, progress had been slow, and apparently there's serious overspending. Just now, the officials explained that circumstances had changed. Labor cost and material cost had increased tremendously. That's why there is this huge overspending. So members were asking whether the estimation was done in an erroneous manner and whether or not these excessively high or low estimations were accurate. But then the officials told us that they tried their very best to do accurate estimation. Anyway, given such discrepancies, we should sum up lessons learned. Because every time when they came back for extra funding, members found their proposals unacceptable. Because you're not talking about millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. You're talking about billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars. So the government should sum up the lessons learned, and they should identify areas for review. And the members asked whether the works had been too concentrated at a certain period of time, leading to a bunching effect. You see, at certain periods of time, we may be spending billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars concurrently. Well, yes, the reality is that we want to improve our infrastructure, but we're not just talking about $70 billion now. I think you have not included MTR projects. I think in total it should be $170 billion. Well, $170 billion. You can imagine the manpower required. You mentioned training, blah, blah, blah. But if there is a bunching effect, what will happen after these few years? You have attracted so many people into the construction industry. In future, they may become jobless. So what will happen then? You see, officials are telling us different things for different projects. Lantang, CEDD, Central Wan Chai Bypass, highways, MTR, another responsible department. So you should sum up the lessons to be learned. So members do have a number of queries here. You really need to reflect on yourselves. A colleague linked this project with the RTHK project, but the two are different. For the RTHK project, we're asking about the necessity of such a scale of project and whether or not we need to spend so much. Yes, I will not reject your remark that given so many projects, our labor sector will benefit with more jobs. But Mr. Michael Tian asked whether all these spendings will go into the pockets of the workers. I really have doubts. I don't know whether some contractors had made use of such opportunities to lift prices. Well, there are uncertainties and we need to carry out a review. Any response from the Undersecretary? A brief response, Chairman. Mr. Tam offered us some advice and opinion, which are worthwhile for our reference. In particular, for price adjustments, we're talking about the future. In future, if the economy and the market are to fluctuate tremendously, discrepancies will result. Well, let's not talk about other projects. For this project, we made our estimation when our economy was at a trough. And throughout the whole world, all jurisdictions have been making use of projects to lift the economy, not just in Hong Kong. Well, in the United States, they've been doing the same. As a result, material costs rose tremendously. Oh, yes, Mr. Tam asked us to make improvement. But given these sudden changes, it is unavoidable that there will be discrepancies. Now, in future, well, I'm making an assumption.
If the inflation rate slows down, we may not need to use up all the money. That has happened before, Chairman. 4 members wish to speak in the first round. Alice Mack, Ma Fong Kwok Chan Yun Han, and Alan Leung. 3 other members, Emily Lau, An Chung, Yip Kwok Kim, would like to speak in the second round. And also Mr. Christopher Chung. 5 members. I think I'll have to draw a line there because the meeting will last till 10:30 today. Ms. Alice Mack. Well, Chairman, please control the time better because some members have exceeded their time limit. It will not be fair to those who speak later. Mr. Michael Tin is not here now. He just said something, and he should be logical in his remarks. And he's saying that the increase is due to the rising wages. Perhaps I should refer him to read a book called The Way of Thinking. Now, wages take up 30% of the entire construction costs, but that doesn't mean that the increase applied for this time is due 30% to the rising wages. There is problem with this logic. Now, there are rising wages locally, and if workers are going to be imported, will that reduce this amount? Well, we don't know whether the wages of construction workers rise because there is an average rise. So we don't know that. Will the shortage of workers drive up wages? We don't know. And can we be sure that workers' wages will reduce when we import workers? I don't think that's true either. So that is not necessarily so. Without all these logical thinking, then he says that because of rising wages, we are asking for this additional funding. I don't think his argument holds water because it lacks logic. I can't accept his remarks. I agree with Dr. Kenneth Chen. For this, be it this project or the Liantang project, the increase is due because of difficulties in investigation works related to bedrock situation in Hong Kong. And the depth of the bedrock is found to be deeper than that found in the original site investigation works. Well, I accept that there may be discrepancy. But then, for this project and all the Lintong project, the same problem arises. So for this kind of discrepancy, is there any kind of international standard? Well, it seems that for every project, we have this kind of discrepancy. Is it a worldwide phenomenon? Is there a standard to the percentage of discrepancy? How does Hong Kong compare to other countries as far as this discrepancy range is concerned? Do we have such standards? Director, please. Thank you, Ms. Mack, for your question. When we did boring works, we used a 2-inch boring machine. So the samples taken out are 2 cm in diameter. So using such a small scale machine, there is bound to be discrepancies. According to my own experience, we did boring at the site where foundation works are to be carried out. There will be discrepancy because this sample will be just 2 cm in diameter. We have, when we do foundation or piling works, we have to make sure that the foundation rests on stable bedrock. So we have to do the piling across an entire piece of bedrock. So there may be discrepancies because of that. So the way we're doing it in Hong Kong is the same as what is being done in other countries. So what about the discrepancy? How does Hong Kong compare to that in other countries? Well, we are on a par with that in other nations. Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. There has been a number of projects on which additional funding is required. We are very frustrated about this. When the government plans for large-scale projects, I recall that before the handover, there were situations where there was overspending. I was an electrical member then too, and I repeatedly asked that the government should phase out these projects so that there will not be any adverse impact on the construction sector. And I suggest that the administration should monitor closely the construction projects and their impact on prices and the impact on contractors' profits and returns. Is the government doing that too now? So the increases in cost of the projects, are they really needed, or will they be just allowing the contractors to make huge profits? So this is my first question. Second question, Mr. Lau made responses to members' questions. I agree partly to his answers. So when you did site investigation works, theoretically, you should do more sampling of the site, because you should have foreseen the variations in the bedrock. And you should not be using the excuse that there will be a waste and you reduce on the sampling quantity. Now, if you reduce the sampling quantity, you have to factor in the risk factors. So in your project estimates, you have to build in the provisions for the risk. So it seems to me that you're just following past mechanisms and practices, and you are not anticipating and managing the risks properly. On the question on the construction sector, perhaps I'll defer to the Development Bureau to tackle that, and then Highways Department. Second question. Thank you, Mr. Lau, for your question. Mr. Lau is right. We should manage the risk properly and undertake or launch corresponding measures. Actually, for this project, we did more boring than we normally do. Along this 3.3 kilometers tunnel, we did 280 boring exercise, and that is much higher than a normal or ordinary project. The difficulty is because it is a continuous diaphragm wall, and it will be difficult for us to actually make a good assessment of the situation. Concerning the geology, because some parts of the tunnel lie along the typhoon shelter and the navigation channel, and we may create difficulties to the fishermen when we do the sampling. So we have to strike a balance here. As I mentioned, the discrepancy in the use of the diaphragm walls and barrette piles, so there is a discrepancy of 5 to 6%. But then, taking the entire project as a whole, the percentage is even lower. So in the contingency, we provide for 10% in the contingencies. So I think this 10% contingency should be able to cope with such risks and discrepancies. Contingencies are there to allow for discrepancies. The other question, who to take that? Mr. Chen. Mr. Ma talked about supervising project cost and project volume. We do have a good mechanism now, and every year we make detailed review on project estimates and provisions for price adjustment, and we submit that to the relevant bureau for scrutiny. Mr. Tam also mentioned a figure, and he has, I believe he has made reference to the CIC's figures in the past, in the next couple of years. There will be projects amounting to $170 billion, and for government projects, $70 billion. So we are monitoring on every side, on cost estimate, on progress of works, and also manpower requirement and so on. What about the contractors' profits? Have you made an assessment of that? Well, it will be difficult for us to assess the individual contractors' profits. We don't have such figures. Well, a lot of them are really listed companies. You should have the figures. Ms. Chen Yinhan, Chairman. Well, members on the PWSC are heavily criticized by the public. They are the public is criticizing us for being a spendthrift. People told us that, say, as far as RTHK, the present project, and Liantong project are concerned, there is an increase in estimates in terms of billions of dollars. The professionals have this impression that the government is being shortchanged by the sector on the Liantong project. For the cave-in, only 70% of the site can be investigated, and 30% of the sites cannot be investigated. The same goes for this project. The director said that you are being professional in your site investigation works, but I have doubts on that. Well, people who deal with you know that you have problems, and then we are also seeing soaring costs in labor and also material costs. So these contractors are trying to shortchange you. Now, I am not from the profession, but professionals do tell us that the things are getting too expensive these days. And I think that because we have so many projects, they are driving up costs. That is not disputed. But then we did envisage that there are so many projects upcoming. When I was still electrical member and many of the infrastructure projects were being planned, and members kept asking, what about manpower planning and so on? We did ask that sort of question. What are your preparation works? You shouldn't be just talking today about training of young people. Well, for all these problems, I don't know whether it has to do with the coordination among government departments. Say, the Matthew Zhou should help with the manpower planning, or the education director should help with the manpower planning. So without all these coordinations, problems are bound to arise. So my question for the Undersecretary, we are overspending by billions of dollars. Will we be undertaking a review or study on the mechanism, say in particular on manpower training?
Well, for those remarks, particularly those related to the Highways Department, in the past 10 years, we used the same mechanism for 72 projects involving $320 billion of contract costs. And only 11 projects we had to ask for extra funding to the tune of $20 billion, 6% of the total number of projects. So a very low percentage of projects resulted in extra spending. So for training and education, we should do more, and I believe the government should do that. Undersecretary, I think you're lopsided in your views. In the past few years, after I returned to LegCo, I had been listening to increases and increases and increases in PWSC. But these increases are to the tune of billions of dollars or even tens of billions of dollars. So you should go back and conduct a review. For major projects or large-scale projects, maybe you should bring in, or when more than one bureau are involved, who should be responsible? You are now shirking your responsibilities. Well, we are very agitated. Should we councillors act like you by shirking our responsibilities? I think in future, when you face these large-scale projects, there must be a mechanism to cope with such increases. Don't come back and say that you don't have sufficient manpower, you don't have sufficient training, you don't have sufficient funding. I agree with Ms. Alice Mack. Mr. James Tan's remarks were irresponsible. We must have a responsible government. It seems that they're saying that the labor sector should be held liable, but that should not be the case. In these cases of overspending, the government should submit a report to us to tell us what they will do in future to address the problem. Don't just tell us the U.S. government has been doing the same. Well, the concern is in terms of the number of projects, in terms of estimation, what should be done in future to cope with the same situations. I think colleagues were talking about that. Well, we had the 10 major infrastructure projects a few years ago, and now they seem to be putting all the blame on the workers. I don't think the two bureaus represented here can answer that question. It's related to the overall administration of the government. Well, you should talk to Mrs. Carrie Lam. It seems that every time after we've made certain remarks, they did not study our remarks. Mr. Allen Leung, if there are 10 projects and you can evenly distribute those projects amongst 10 years, then you should be able to perform very well. And now they are focusing all these, or they are concentrating all these 10 projects in 2 years. Overspending is a mistake created by themselves. It seems that they're not controlling the circumstances. They're allowing the circumstances to control them. The Deputy Secretary mentioned estimation, labor estimation, materials, etc. They claim that the government has been controlling or monitoring these projects. I'd like to know this. In the next 3 years, if we have to have a major civil engineering project, how much manpower or materials will be in shortage, And whom should I approach? If I asked, well, should I ask the Deputy Secretary, the Secretary for Development, the CE, or whoever? There should be only one point of contact from which we'll be able to know the overall picture, the full picture. Otherwise, we'll have the impression that, as we have already started, we cannot stop midway. Then we are forced to approve these funding proposals. Well, to put it in modest terms, you're trying to create reality to force the LegCo to approve the funding proposals. Well, to put it in a more layman expression, you are spending money without bearing the consequences. Now, we are discussing the Central Wan Chai bypass, and this afternoon we're going to discuss the Liantang Heng Yuen Wai project. It's the same problem. Insufficient investigation for tunnel works. Similarly, we're talking about increased provisions for price adjustments. As members said, they actually knew that there are risks related to investigation of tunnel works. So they shouldn't have treated this project as a bridge project, a building project, in making provisions for price adjustments. Now, in both cases, we're talking about a tunnel, and we've seen huge discrepancies. Therefore, the government should go back and reflect on itself. I've got 2.5 minutes left. Whom should I ask at any time? Which government department will know the full picture? And I said the government is being led by the prevailing circumstances. Well, I think these remarks are similar to those of Ms. Chen Yunhan. Who will answer this? Deputy Secretary. Concerning the construction industry, be it labor training or monitoring of the project, they all come under the Development Bureau. So the Development Bureau has the responsibility to oversee everything. As for external economic factors, Hong Kong's future economy in the next few years, which may impact on the construction industry, then things are more complicated because we may be affected by the overall environment. Anyway, the Development Bureau will oversee everything. We've kept in continuous collaboration with the CIC. All these come under the Development Bureau. Mr. Chairman, it seems that the government does not admit that it is to blame. Well, I think this has something to do with the overall economic environment globally. I don't think the officials here can answer Mr. Alan Leung's question about the overall economic environment. Mr. Christopher Chung is speaking for the first time, and then Ms. Emily Lau and Mr. Ip Kok Him will speak for a second time. Mr. Christopher Chung. Mr. Chairman, in recent times, there has been serious overspending for government projects. I think they should work out how they are going to control prices. We're not talking about increases to the tune of 10%. We're talking about folds of increases. Here we have a 2-fold increase, and for the RTHK project is a 10-fold or even 16-fold increase. So they must look for a solution. Otherwise, no matter how much reserves we have, we'll go bankrupt one day. Now, this project is not just overspending. Some politicians have been making use of our policies to delay the project, thus leading to such serious overspending. On the one hand, these politicians are saying that the government itself is to blame. At the same time, they're delaying the projects. Now, 5 or 6 or 8 vessels in the typhoon shelters are affected for as long as 8 years. Eastern District, Wan Chai District, and Central District, their residents are suffering from traffic congestion day after day. From Excelsior Hotel to the electrical complex, I may need to spend 45 minutes. If I walk, I think I can walk twice already that distance. So this serious consequence is the result of political tactics. But these are livelihood issues. Don't play politics on such issues. When I take taxi drivers have been blaming. They asked why journeys are taken so long. This project impacts on our livelihood and our economy. So the government, well, having said all these, the government should control overspending. Well, overspending has been repeated and repeated at this meeting. We'll put all those remarks on record. Second round, Ms. Emily Lau and Mr. Ip Kok Him, 3 minutes each. Ms. Lau. Mr. Chairman, I think the administration has listened to these remarks. LegCo members are very much disturbed. They should go back and conduct a review every time they're coming back for billions of dollars. But we cannot reject them. Well, the director seemed to be saying that LegCo members asked them to award a contract to the lowest bidder. We did not say so. You should not squander, but should you award contracts always to the lowest bidders? I'd like the director to clarify the situation. It shouldn't be so. Yes, a quarterly report, a half-yearly report, an annual report are good. But don't just give us very thick reports. Don't let members dig through those thick piles of documents in order to find answers. Just now I asked the Undersecretary, today, what if we do not approve this funding proposal? And he said that the decision would be ours. But you came so late. What can we do? I think we should have some mechanisms in advance such that you can act earlier. Well, what should happen today? I would like to have an answer from the Undersecretary. The Council should receive prior notice such that we know what will happen if we are to reject your proposals. Don't just come back and say, oh, we've overspent by $8 billion. Please approve our extra funding proposal. That shouldn't be the case.
I will take Ms. Lau's second question. We've heard your views. After we make a funding application, we will supervise the progress of works. Our overriding principle is that we would try to spend within the approved estimates in an effective way. So if we bump into any problems, and if needed, we need to let members know or seek for additional funding. We will try to do it as soon as we can. And actually, for this project, last year, we did consult the transport panel. Well, actually, the meeting today should have been held earlier, i.e. last year. So because of other items that need to be discussed. The meeting has been delayed for several times. So we originally planned to award the contract in February. So I agree with Ms. Lau that we would try to inform members as soon as we can if there is anything untoward happening. This time round, we tried to lay out all the justifications for the additional funding, and the extraordinary factors only surfaced in the middle of last year. On the question about the lowest bid, perhaps I have not made myself clear. Sorry for not making myself clear. Well, it's not that we chose the lowest bid. The most important thing is value for money. So we will look at both the quality and the bid price. Can we hold another meeting or separate meeting to discuss or to require the administration to give us notice as early as possible when something extraordinary pops up? Well, perhaps I will listen to Mr. Yip Kwok Him's views first before we take the issue to the development panel for discussion on this topic. Mr. Yip Kwok Him. For this particular project, there has been a drastic increase. And paragraph 9 says clearly that the government has this mechanism on contract price fluctuation payments. There is a risk factor. Well, as far as I understand, risks are not, say, related to investigation works, but rather the risk should be borne by the contractors and the tenderers, and not the government. We also mentioned about the investigation works related to tunnel works. I think that's unavoidable. In the contracts, the contractors are allowed to make adjustment based on fluctuating prices related to wages and material costs. Should we allow them to do so? Should we stick to this model? Well, should the workers be benefiting because of this rising costs? I don't think so. Well, actually, in the community, there are so many building maintenance projects going on as well. I think the government should make macro adjustments. It should set priorities for projects, and not all projects should be concentrated within a certain period. They should be spread out. For Central Wanzhai Bypass project, you may be competing for workers and materials against, say, the Lok Ma Chau project. So I don't think this is proper. I think the administration should face up to this issue. You must not force the members to approve your application. And in the RTHK project, Albert Chen said that, well, even though the project is a spendthrift project, but they are going to support it irrespectively because it's going to be politically correct. What we stress is that whether the funding application is reasonable, because we're talking about taxpayers' money, and we should use public funds prudently. And it's not that we must approve your application. Thank you very much for your comment. There is no need for the administration to respond. So all the members have spoken. Before we take the vote, I would like to reiterate the points of each concern raised by members, including project planning, project estimates and project progress, there should be better monitoring. Well, as I said, I would refer the issue to the Development Bureau for follow-up. Actually, in 2007, there was a discussion on the same subject. So actually, before the PWSC meetings, there was also a briefing held in which the administration gave detailed explanations on project estimates. Well, the members have no problem with the basic principles behind the project estimates. But then, when the projects are implemented, there are problems. Say for this project, the estimate was made in 2009. Should the administration come back earlier when they found that there is going to be overspending? For the Liantang Hengyuwei project, the project estimate was approved 17 months earlier, and they are now coming back for additional funding. Then that raises another question on whether the estimates were made correctly originally. So it's really difficult for us to cover the entire issue on this subject within such a short meeting as ours today. So we'll refer the issue to the Development Bureau for follow-up. Ms. Chen Yin-han, the Development panel holds a lot of meetings, and the government is now seeking additional funding for so many projects. So the government should make a review. Because different bureaus are involved in one project. So should we be involving different policy bureaus and discussions? Now, I am saying that the Development Bureau should look at the coordination of projects in terms of the project estimates. There may be room for improvement. And as for the coordination among different policies, bureaus, and departments, we will also refer the issue to the chairman of the House Committee to think about. But I think, in any case, we need a certain panel to follow up on the case. Ms. Lau, well, of course, the Development Bureau can discuss the issue, but some things fall outside their portfolio. For example, some projects are related to transport and housing. Is the subcommittee a suitable venue for discussing these projects? I'm looking at the terms of reference of the PWSC. I need an occasion where all these issues can be discussed, one single platform. Well, as the Undersecretary said, the Development Bureau has the responsibility of coordinating all public works projects and monitor these projects. Well, can someone undertake that panel will discuss all these issues? Yes, the Development panel can do that. If members don't have any other questions, we'll take a vote on the issue. Those for, please raise your hands. Those against, please raise your hands. No objection. Abstention, no. Well, I think the majority of the voting members support the proposal, so the proposal is approved. So for this public works project, this will be submitted for discussion at the Finance Committee meeting on the 24th of January. So I would like to ask whether members will ask for separate voting at the Finance Committee. No? Views? No need. All right. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you, administration representatives. Thank you.